At my own husband's inheritance dinner, they told me to sit down and shut up, as if I hadn't built this family from scratch, as if I was just the widow. I smiled, got up, and left without a word. They laughed when the door closed. But in the morning, their accounts were frozen. Their house was locked, and I legally owned everything. And that was just the beginning. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the rest of this incredible story. They told me to sit down and shut up at my own husband's estate dinner. Said I was just the widow, like I hadn't built this family from the ground up. I smiled, stood, and left without a word. They laughed as the door closed behind me. But by sunrise, their bank accounts were frozen, their homes were locked, and everything they thought was theirs was legally mine. And I wasn't finished yet. Before we dive in, please like this video and hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story like this. Also, drop a comment with where you're watching from. Thanks. My name is Margaret Thompson. I'm 68 years old, and apparently, to my own family, that makes me just the widow now. I ironed my blouse twice before heading out, checked my lipstick 3 times, and told myself not to cry. No matter what, it was just dinner. Just my family. Just the people I'd loved and raised for over 4 decades. We were meeting at my son Ryan's house, the sleek, modern one he and Jessica bought after George and I co-signed their loan. Not that anyone mentions that anymore. They said we were gathering to discuss estate matters, which I assumed meant the house, the cabin by the lake, and the retirement accounts, things George and I built from scratch while eating canned soup for lunch and skipping vacations for 20 years straight. I brought a peach cobbler because George always said it was my best, hoping it might lighten the mood. When I walked in, no one looked up. Ryan was already pouring wine like he was hosting a Sonoma County tasting. Jessica, in her strappy heels and forced smile, was bustling around the kitchen like she owned it. Their oldest, Ethan, gave me a nod, the kind you'd give a distant acquaintance from a funeral. The air was thick with passive-aggressive tension and something burning in the oven. We sat, 9 of us, at the table I'd gifted them last Christmas. Ryan started with, "We've been thinking it's best to streamline things." I knew exactly what that meant. Less of me, more of them. When I asked, carefully, "Have you talked to the lawyer about the trust?" Jessica didn't even glance up from her phone. She muttered, "You're just the widow, Margaret. Maybe stay quiet for now." The room went still. Then Ryan chuckled, and so did Connor, my other son, like it was a punchline from some sitcom. My hands trembled under the table, not from weakness, but because the weight of that moment hit like a second death. Except this time, I was the one being buried. I looked at them, one by one. Their eyes were glazed like I was a placeholder, not a person. I set my fork down, stood, and said nothing. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of tears or arguments. I left the cobbler untouched on the counter. I walked to my car, locked the door, and for the first time in 43 years, the silence inside felt like peace, not loneliness. They didn't even call after me, and they had no idea what I was about to do. I didn't sleep that night, not for a second. I sat in George's old leather recliner, wrapped in the same worn blanket we used to bicker over on chilly nights, the one with frayed edges and a faint coffee stain he never noticed. The room felt like it was holding its breath, and I kept replaying their words. "You're just the widow. Maybe stay quiet." Like I was a side character in my own family's story. At 2:30 a.m., I couldn't take the stillness anymore. I walked barefoot across the hall to the cabinet we never let the boys touch. The off-limits drawer, we called it, where we kept passports, titles, old wills, tax documents, and things they didn't need to know. My hands were cold as I opened it. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe proof I still had a place in this family, that George hadn't left me defenseless. I sifted through familiar papers, insurance forms, birth certificates, an old photo of us in Montana. Then I saw it. A thick white envelope tucked in the back, labeled in George's handwriting with one word: Margaret. I stared, half expecting it to vanish. George wasn't one for sentimental notes. He showed love by checking tire pressure and cleaning gutters, not through letters. I opened it slowly, hands shaking, and found a single page of notebook paper with a stack of clipped documents behind it. The letter read, "If you're reading this, something's gone wrong. I wanted to tell you sooner, but I knew you'd try to fix things instead of protecting yourself. The boys aren't bad, but they're selfish. And Jessica's worse. I saw it coming when I got sick. I made changes. Everything's in your name: house, accounts, the lake cabin. You have full authority, power of attorney. They don't know. Don't feel guilty using it. Don't let them shame you into silence. If they try to take what's yours, burn it all down." I sat there, frozen, the weight sinking in. I had no idea he'd done this. We'd discussed the will vaguely, but I thought he was just being cautious. The documents were official, notarized, stamped by our lawyer, David. Everything was legal and binding: financial control clauses, ownership restructuring, asset transfers effective immediately upon his death. George had rewritten everything 8 months before he passed, during a time I thought we were just managing doctor visits and new medications. He'd done it quietly, with total clarity, likely after noticing Ryan snooping through his business records and Jessica asking those odd, smiling questions about next steps. I could almost hear George's voice telling me to stay sharp, to stop doubting my own strength. I made tea to keep my hands busy, though I didn't drink it. I paced the kitchen, rechecked the documents, confirmed the signature dates. It was real. The more I looked, the more something shifted. That feeling of being invisible, a tag-along in someone else's legacy, gave way to something new: control. At 3:47 a.m., I picked up the landline and called David Carter, our lawyer for over 30 years, the one who used to slip George fishing magazines during meetings and always called me Mrs. Thompson, even when I told him to stop. He answered after 4 rings, groggy but alert when I said my name. I didn't waste time. "George left everything to me. I found the paperwork. I want to activate it today." He paused, then asked if anyone else knew. "No, not yet," I said. "Good," he replied. "Don't tell them. I'll be there by 9 with everything you need." I hung up and stood in the hallway, staring at the old wedding photo on the wall. Us, on the courthouse steps, young and scared, but completely in sync. I touched the frame and whispered, "I've got this now. You don't have to worry." Then I sat down, folded the documents into a clean manila folder, and placed it in my purse like it was a loaded gun. Because it was. If they thought I'd sit quietly while they carved up my life, they were about to learn what kind of woman they'd pushed out the door. By the time David rang the doorbell at 8:57 a.m., I was dressed, makeup done, hair pinned back the way George liked, with the documents spread across the dining table like a battle plan. I'd scribbled questions in the margins while pacing the night before. He stepped inside with his briefcase and that same worn leather folder he'd carried since the boys were kids. When he saw George's envelope, his expression shifted from concern to grim respect. We spent 2 hours reviewing every clause, every legal term, every trigger point. By 11:15, I'd signed 6 documents transferring control of every asset, property, account, and business interest to my name. David made the final call to the estate manager, confirming all instructions now came from me. Not Ryan, not Connor, not the trust, just me. Hearing him say it out loud felt surreal. All further authorization rests solely with Mrs. Margaret Thompson. I don't think I breathed for a full minute. Then he asked, "Do you want them to find out through their accounts or call a meeting?" I thought for a second and said, "Let them feel it. Let it hit like a freight train." He smiled. That's the Margaret I remember. And just like that, it was done. I spent the afternoon on the phone with George's brokerage manager, the property firm, the title company, and the accountant. Each confirmed my name was now the only one that mattered. By 3 p.m., Ryan texted, "Hey, weird question, but do you know why the cabin account's locked?" I didn't reply. 5 minutes later, Jessica called. I let it go to voicemail. Her tone was sharp but sugary, the way it gets when she thinks she can charm something out of you. By 4:30, the group chat exploded with messages about account issues. Connor, who rarely speaks, texted, "Did someone change access on Mom's end?" That's when I knew the panic had started. They hadn't grasped what I'd done, but the tremor had hit, and the aftershocks were coming. I waited until 5:05, knowing they'd be back at Ryan's for another strategy dinner. I walked up the stone path with a folder in hand and knocked like I was just dropping off a casserole. Ryan opened the door, confused, irritated, his fake smile barely holding. I walked in, set the folder on the counter, and said, "You all might want to sit down." They didn't. Of course they didn't. Jessica leaned against the counter, arms crossed, and Connor lingered in the hallway like he might bolt. I opened the folder slowly, laid out the documents, and said, "This is the new estate plan. Everything is in my name. Everything." Silence. Not the shocked kind, but the arrogant kind, like they thought they could outsmart me. Ryan snorted. "You can't just move money without the trust's board." I looked him dead in the eye and said, "There is no trust board. George dissolved it last year. You didn't read the fine print." Jessica stepped forward, scanning the papers with her manicured nails and practiced smile, saying, "No way this is binding." I handed her the notarized copy with David's signature and date stamp. She froze. I stepped back and said, "This isn't a negotiation. It's a notification. As of this morning, you have no legal claim to any of it." No one moved. No one spoke. It was the first time in years that room was quiet while I stood in it. I turned to leave, paused at the door, and added, "Next time you want to discuss my future, you'll need an appointment." I didn't slam the door or make a speech. I just walked away, leaving them in the house George and I paid for, choking on the control they thought they had. The next morning, I was making coffee, the old drip machine sputtering as it finished. I could feel the tension building before I even checked my phone. 5 missed calls from Ryan, 3 from Jessica, 1 from Connor, who'd waited until the storm hit to poke his head out. I ignored them all and sat at the table with my mug, watching the steam rise, wondering if they'd slept. Part of me hoped they hadn't. At 9:12 a.m., Ryan sent a less aggressive, more confused text. "Can we just talk?" That told me they were unraveling. By noon, David called to say Ryan had tried accessing 2 accounts from his work laptop, both flagged by the system. I said, "Good, let him dig." An hour later, Jessica showed up uninvited, wearing oversized sunglasses like I wouldn't recognize her through tinted plastic and Botox. I didn't let her in. She stood on the porch, fake smile tight, voice dripping with false concern. "Margaret, we're all a little confused. Why would George do this behind our backs?" I looked her in the eye and said, "Maybe because he knew what you'd do in front of him." She flinched like I'd slapped her. I added, "You should leave. This is trespassing." She tried a vague threat about lawyers, but I closed the door before she finished. 10 minutes later, Connor called, voice low, like he didn't want his wife to hear. "Mom, I didn't know about any of this. I thought the trust was automatic. I didn't know Jessica and Ryan were pushing for control." I heard guilt, or maybe fear of being cut off. I said, "You had every chance to ask me directly. You didn't. That silence is your signature." He didn't respond, just hung up. That night, I cooked dinner for 1. Roasted chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, green beans with lemon, because I was done eating scraps while others feasted on my sacrifices. As I poured a glass of wine, the landline rang. It was Lily, Ryan, and Jessica's 17-year-old daughter, the only one who ever looked me in the eye at family dinners. Her voice was quiet, almost shaking. "Grandma? I don't know what's going on, but Mom and Dad are freaking out. They said something about money being gone and the house being in trouble. Are you okay?" That hit harder than anything else. I softened. I'm fine, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. She hesitated, then whispered, I miss Grandpa. He'd hate this. I swallowed hard and told her the truth. That's why he fixed it before it broke. After we hung up, I sat alone at the table, surrounded by quiet, and felt something new. Not grief, not rage, but clarity. George had seen this mess coming, and now they were flailing without a safety net. Ryan had lost access to accounts he thought were his. Jessica had no legal hold on the house she bragged about to her book club. Connor was just realizing silence didn't equal innocence. And Lily, the only one with heart left in that family, was caught in the middle. I knew this was just the start. People like them don't fold. They scramble, twist, look for loopholes. But they didn't yet understand I wasn't some grieving old woman waiting for their approval. I was the firewall now, and if they wanted to challenge me, they'd better come prepared for the next blow. 2 days after I shut the door on Jessica, David called with a tone that made me sit down before he spoke. There's something you need to see, he said. An hour later, I was in his office, the same one where George and I used to sign tax forms and sip burnt coffee from chipped mugs. He slid a folder across the desk without a word. I opened it and didn't understand at first. Bank statements, account transfers, loan agreements, all with Ryan's name. He used your husband's business line of credit as collateral, David said. $500,000, maybe more, depending on what's still being uncovered. He signed as a partner, but that partnership dissolved when George passed, making these fraudulent. My hands went cold. I flipped through the papers again, slower, watching dates and figures align. The new SUV Ryan bought last year, the sudden kitchen remodel, the ski trip to Vail they claimed was sponsored by friends. It was all tied to money he had no right to touch. He did this while George was sick? I asked, my voice quieter than intended. David nodded. The first transaction hit 2 weeks after George's first surgery. I stared at the numbers until they stopped looking like numbers and started looking like betrayal, the kind that festers from within. David leaned forward. We can press charges or let the financial noose tighten and watch him squirm. Your call. I didn't answer yet. I needed to sit with it. I drove home without music, without stopping, and went straight to George's study, still mostly untouched. I pulled out the old leather journal he kept behind the encyclopedias, where he jotted tax season notes. On one of the last pages, in his neat, slanted handwriting, was a list. Ryan's withdrawals look off. Ask David. He'd known. He'd suspected and never got the chance to follow through. Now it was my job to finish what he couldn't. That night, I didn't sleep. I spread the documents on the kitchen table like puzzle pieces, staring at proof my son, my own flesh and blood, stole from us while we drowned in doctor visits and chemo side effects. I wanted to scream, but didn't. Instead, I made a new folder, labeled it Firewood, and started planning. What assets could I sell? What debts could I call in? What investments could I freeze that Ryan might still be tied to? The next morning, I called David and said, Don't press charges yet. Let him stew. I want him broke before he's scared. That day, I called the estate accountant, Peter, whom I hadn't seen since George's retirement party, and asked point blank, Did you know about this? He didn't deny it. I had concerns, but your name wasn't on anything until now. My hands were tied. I said, They're not anymore. Start talking. And he did, for over an hour, about suspicious fund movements, red flags he couldn't investigate without permission, and how Ryan had likely racked up debt, assuming he'd inherit everything and clean it up after George died. It wasn't just greed, it was arrogance. He never thought I'd hold the pen when the dust settled. That night, I sent Ryan one message. You might want a lawyer, an accountant, and a cheap apartment. No reply, but I didn't need one. The silence was louder than anything, screaming of everything he thought was his slipping through my hands. 3 days later, they invited me to a family barbecue like nothing had happened. Like we hadn't turned the family tree upside down and shaken out the rot. Every instinct told me to stay home and let them choke on their lies, but I went. Sometimes silence isn't power. Showing up is. I wore the pearl earrings George gave me for our 30th anniversary and brought a bottle of Napa Valley Red I knew they couldn't afford. The backyard looked staged, fake as hell. Plastic tablecloths, forced smiles, music just loud enough to dodge real talk. Jessica was in white, like she was proving something. Ryan was at the grill, playing provider, flipping burgers like his world wasn't crumbling. Connor nodded awkwardly, unsure if he should be mad or relieved. I didn't wait. I walked to the picnic table, dropped the firewood folder, and said, "We need to talk now." Jessica rolled her eyes. Ryan muttered something, and Connor grabbed a beer like a kid dodging a fight. I opened the folder and laid out the documents. Loan fraud, forged partnership extensions, fund transfers. "This is what Ryan did while your father was dying," I said, voice flat, not raised, because people remember how calm you are when you speak. Ryan laughed, saying, "This is ridiculous. That's not even—" I cut him off. "It's not a guess. It's notarized, confirmed, and the only reason you're not in jail is because I'm giving you one last chance to own it." Jessica's voice was shrill. "This is a setup. He didn't steal anything. George would have told us." I turned to her slowly and said, "George saw it. He just didn't trust you to fix it." For once, she was speechless. Lily, sitting quietly by the fence, looked at me with wide eyes, like she was seeing the cracks in everything she'd been taught. I turned to Ryan. "You'll start signing things over today. The vehicles, the cabin furniture, the business inventory. You don't get to enjoy what you tried to destroy." Ryan's jaw clenched, chest heaving. "You're burning the whole family down over paperwork." I leaned in and said, "No, you did that when you stole from your father's grave." That shut him up. I turned toward the gate and heard Jessica mutter, "You're just bitter. A bitter old woman who can't let go." I stopped, didn't turn, and said just loud enough, "No, I'm the woman who paid for this entire yard, and I just decided you're not invited back." I walked out without looking back. At home, I poured that wine and sat on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees, wondering how grief and power could coexist. I wasn't happy, but I was free. And freedom tastes a hell of a lot better than forced smiles and stolen money. The following Monday, I met the real estate attorney and handed him the list of properties George and I still owned. The lake house Ryan posted about on social media, the downtown condo Connor was secretly renting out for cash, and the SUV Jessica drove Lily to school in, claiming it was Ryan's hard work when it had George's signature on the lease, now legally mine. I signed the sale orders one by one, no hesitation, just clean signatures that felt like cutting out rot from a family that stopped functioning years ago. The lawyer asked if I wanted to notify them personally or let the paperwork speak. I said, "They didn't invite me when they thought they were splitting the kingdom. I'm not giving them a stage now that it's collapsing." By Friday, Ryan's business account was drained of illegal equity. Jessica's credit cards were declined at a boutique in Stamford, and Connor called, breathless, asking if the building manager was serious about terminating his lease. "Yes," I said, "and the next tenant will pay rent like everyone else." Jessica didn't go quietly. She showed up, red-faced, screaming on my steps like a reality TV star in designer heels, threatening to accuse me of elder abuse, despite my standing there with better posture, better legal footing, and frankly better skin than her, despite all the fillers. I didn't open the door. I stood behind the window, blinds cracked, and watched her unravel until she stormed off. The next morning, I had a locksmith change the cabin's locks. The day after, the SUV was repossessed from Ryan's driveway mid-brunch, with neighbors peeking from their lawns. This wasn't revenge. It was reclaiming what was mine, what George and I built while they waited for the inheritance buffet to open. Lily texted that night. "Dad's losing it. They're talking about moving in with Aunt Karen. Is this permanent?" I stared at the screen before replying. Actions are permanent, so are consequences. She didn't respond, but I saw her typing and stopping like she wanted to say more. I understood. She was caught between the people who raised her and the truth they hid. That night, I slept better than I had in months. No dreams, no tossing, just a deep quiet settling into my bones like peace breaking through the noise. When I woke, an email from the estate's financial advisor confirmed every major asset was reclaimed, liquidated, or reassigned. The last sentence hit me. "You now hold 100% control." For the first time since George died, I believed it. Halfway through my morning toast, the doorbell rang. Before I could check the window, a white envelope slid under the door. No return address, just my name in shaky handwriting. I thought it might be from Lily, maybe something she couldn't text. But when I opened it, a psychiatric recommendation form fell out, unsigned, with capacity evaluation recommended circled in red highlighter. I knew it instantly. A setup. I'd seen enough of George's legal briefs to recognize it. Someone, and I didn't need to guess who, was trying to challenge my estate control by claiming I was mentally unfit. I held the paper, not scared, just burning with the insult of their cowardice. That afternoon, I dropped the envelope on David's desk without a word. He scanned it, eyebrows rising, and said, "They went this route. That's bold." I nodded. "Trace it. I want to know who ordered it, who wrote it, who forged access." 2 days later, David called, voice sharp. "It was Jessica. She got a notary who owed her a favor to backdate the file. We've got emails. An assistant turned them over. She didn't like being asked to commit a felony on a Sunday." I said, "Press charges." He replied, "Already in motion." That evening, a sheriff's car pulled into Ryan's driveway as they loaded groceries into a borrowed sedan. Neighbors watched like it was a spectacle. Jessica screamed, sobbed, and shouted, but it didn't stop them from cuffing her on the sidewalk and reading the charges. Forgery, fraud, attempted abuse of the court system. Ryan tried to step in, but a deputy shut him down with a hand on his chest. I wasn't there, but Lily told me later, quietly, like she was ashamed to know them. "She tried to say it was your fault," Lily whispered. But no one believed her, not even Dad. I told her, "Some people don't break. They rot from the inside until there's nothing left but noise." She didn't reply, but I heard her breathing on the line, and for once, it felt like someone in that house saw the truth. That night, I poured a drink, opened the old photo album George used to flip through when he missed the boys, and stared at their toddler faces, not because I missed them, but to remind myself I'd loved them once. You don't do this out of hatred. You do it because you're the only one who remembers the sacrifices that built it all. If protecting that meant sending one of them to jail, so be it. Jessica had bet I'd fold, that I'd be too embarrassed, weak, or old to fight. She didn't realize I stopped being afraid the day they told me to sit quietly in a room I paid for. Now I was done with politeness, and I was going to finish the job. Jessica's arraignment was short and brutal, like the damage she tried to cause. I didn't attend. David texted afterward. She took a deal. I didn't need details. She'd never risk a trial with emails and a notary's assistant giving sworn testimony for immunity. The plea meant no jail, but a permanent record and a fine that shook their last scraps of financial stability. Ryan didn't speak to me after. Not to defend her, not to threaten, just silence. The kind that says someone knows the ground's gone. I shifted gears, not for revenge, but necessity. There were taxes to file, properties to close, and decisions about what this fight meant now that the smoke cleared. I wasn't hoarding assets like a dragon. That wasn't the point. I wanted what was mine, what George and I built, safe from rot. So I called Peter and transferred ownership of the small house outside town, the one with the porch swing and blue shutters George said reminded him of his grandma's, to Lily's name. She didn't ask or expect it, but she was the only one who never played me, never looked away. She cried when I told her, not dramatically, just soft and shocked, like it loosened something she'd held too tight. "I don't deserve this," she said. I told her, "You do, because you didn't pretend." That week, I worked with a nonprofit consultant to start the George Thompson Second Chance Fund, a grant program for widowed women over 60 pushed aside, shut out of financial decisions, or left with scraps after their husbands passed. I didn't want a plaque or fanfare, just something that outlasted pain. The first application came before the website launched, a handwritten letter from a woman in Tennessee whose kids drained her account the day after the funeral. I approved her in 2 hours. One night, sorting paperwork, I found a note George scribbled on a dry cleaning receipt tucked in his retirement binder. "Make sure Margaret knows she did it all." I just stood beside her. I didn't cry. I folded it carefully and placed it in the top drawer with the original will, the keys, and now, peace. By Friday, I'd closed the last joint account tied to Ryan's fake LLC, donated the remaining inventory to a local business incubator, and sent a cease and desist to the last law firm dumb enough to take his calls. The rebuild wasn't flashy or fun, but it was mine. Mine and George's, no longer dragged down by greedy ghosts who shared his blood, but none of his honor. As I sat on my porch, sipping coffee while contractors fixed the rotting fence we'd delayed for years, I realized I wasn't just surviving. I was rebuilding from ashes, on my own damn terms. It wasn't until I stood at that same polished table, where they'd told me to sit quietly weeks before, that I saw how far I'd come and how far they'd fallen. I felt no guilt. Ryan had sent the invitation, calling it a casual get-together to reconnect and reset, like this was a glitch we could fix with burgers and fake apologies. I didn't go to forgive. I went so the people who tried to erase me could see me standing tall, no longer asking to exist. Jessica wasn't there. Her plea deal barred her from contacting me for 6 months. Connor hovered in the background, wanting to speak but not knowing how. Lily sat beside me, hands folded, calm and watchful, like she was learning to be still in a room of smoke. Ryan stood at the table's head, acting like it was still his house, his legacy. But he looked smaller, thinner, drained, like he'd stopped believing his own story. He started with a rehearsed line about families weathering storms differently. I wasn't here for his script. I set my glass down, looked at everyone, and said, "This isn't a storm. It's the consequence. And every one of you wrote it." You could hear a pin drop. No one reached for their water or fidgeted. Ryan opened his mouth, maybe to defend himself or toss another excuse into the fire, but I raised a hand and cut him off. "You told me I was just the widow, to sit quietly. But I wasn't quiet when I built this family. I wasn't quiet when I kept it alive, and I sure as hell won't be quiet now that I've taken it back." I paused to let it sink in, then added, "This table, this room, I own them legally, emotionally, structurally. You're guests here, remember that." I stood without waiting for a reply. As I walked to the door, I turned back and said, "You don't have to like me. You just have to understand I'm done shrinking so you can feel big." I left, not out of anger, but because I was done. Outside, the sky was crisp, the kind of light George said was perfect for yard work. As I got in my car, I didn't feel victorious or smug, just settled. I'd fought the fire and walked through it. Now I could rebuild, not because anyone allowed it, but because I gave myself permission. And that, more than any revenge, inheritance, or title, was the win I never expected but damn well earned.